Hello, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our first session of the winter term. This is the Latin American Ethnography Seminar. It is a series hosted by CLACS, which is part of the Institute of Languages, Cultures, and Societies at the School of Advanced Study, University of London. This seminar is run in collaboration with CROLAC, the Center for Research on Latin America and the Caribbean at Queen Mary University in London, the University of Aberdeen, and the Spanish National Research Council. We are three conveners, Ainhoa Montoya, Jessica Sclair, and myself, Denise Roman. Unfortunately, my colleagues could not join us today. But I am delighted to introduce our speaker, Elías Galindo-Paredes, who is a PhD student at the Sociology and Social Anthropology Department at the University of Dalhousie. His talk for today is titled Unravelling Eco-Corruption, Indigenous Perspectives on Conservation Policies and Transformation in Colombia's Tarapoto region. Elías will have around 45 minutes for his presentation, and afterwards we will open up for a Q&A, aiming to finish around 6:15 in the UK. Please keep your microphones on mute during Elías's talk, and if you'd like to ask a question during the Q&A, please use the raise hand function available on Zoom, and I will ask you to unmute. Or you can just pop your questions in the chat box and I will read those out. We are recording Elías's talk, but not the Q&A, and it will be available on the CLACS website shortly. Elías, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to start sharing. You can hear me well, right? All good?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today and share the journey into the heart of my PhD research in the outstanding region of Tarapoto in the Colombian Amazon. This unique wetland has been marketed as the cradle of the pink dolphin. This region not only boasts a rare ecosystem within the Amazonian rainforest, but also harbors unique social issues where nature conservation meets corruption and production of cocaine. Before we dive further, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers. Their diligent effort have made this space for sharing ideas possible, and I truly appreciate the opportunity. For those unfamiliar with me, my name is Elías Galindo, a PhD candidate at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm an anthropologist, and my PhD is also in social anthropology with a focus on political ecology. I have been working in a theoretical framework where the work of Antonio Gramsci meets Slavoj Žižek. I am from Mexico, and I've been doing research on the Colombian Amazon rainforest since 2015. And today's presentation is part of that work, offering insights into key findings of my ethnography, which took place in the Amazon trapeze, in the triple border between Colombia, Brazil, and Peru. Once again, thank you all for being here, and looking forward for a warm Q&A session. So without further delay, I will start. In this presentation, I will show some of the findings of my PhD fieldwork, which took place between 2019 and 2022. I will present some of the social implications of creating a conservation area in an indigenous territory in the Colombian Amazon. That is, what are the local consequences of establishing an international conservation area in an indigenous territory? In Colombia, the indigenous territories are called resguardos. And this resguardo is located in the so-called Amazon trapeze, bordering with Peru. The resguardo is located in the municipalities of Puerto Nariño and Leticia in the Colombian department of Amazonas. The only Ramsar site in the Colombian Amazonia is located in this resguardo. For those who do not know what a Ramsar site is, well, a Ramsar site is a wetland area of international importance designated under the Ramsar Convention, also known as the Convention on Wetlands. This international treaty, under UNESCO's auspices, is the sole global agreement dedicated to a single ecosystem. Currently, the Ramsar Convention boasts 172 contracting parties, that is, member countries. This wetland is vital for the 22 indigenous fishing communities of the resguardo, which exhibit a remarkable per capita fish consumption ranging from 122 to 288 kilograms, significantly outpacing the national average of 7 to 9 kilograms per capita annually. This impressive fish consumption not only sets a record within the country, but propels the region into the global levels of per capita daily fish consumption. To put this into perspective, according to the FAO, Iceland leads the world in fishing consumption, consuming 87.7 kilograms per capita annually, followed by Portugal with 57 and Spain with 56. In comparison, residents in Ticoya boast an annual intake around 122 kilograms. Particularly regarding fishing, became a contentious issue, altering social dynamics, cultural tradition, and land management. After an industrialized fish and timber extraction led by the Colombian state and international private companies, the number of fish in the area decreased dramatically, which led in the 1980s indigenous initiatives to regulate their fishing activities. This grassroots initiative was later influenced by NGOs like Omacha Foundation. However, differences in conservation approaches between indigenous communities and external stakeholders grew up. Despite achieving a fishing regulation in 1999, it was until 2017 when the Colombian government officially sanctioned those fishing agreements in the resguardo, paving the way for the establishment of a Ramsar site in 2018. The implementation of this site, however, followed with limited awareness among many residents in the resguardo. Indigenous leaders raised concerns about the hurried and unclear nature of the prior consultation and socialization processes for the Ramsar site, resulting in escalating tensions. Concerns about hasty consultation processes and corruption allegations led to the rise of new indigenous leaders, reshaping political engagement in the indigenous resguardo, witnessing heightened participation from women in leadership roles, a transformative shift from traditional leadership dominated by elderly men. In this presentation, I will briefly introduce these entanglements between fishing policies, international conservation initiatives, and local allegations on corruption, which have reshaped the local social fabric and local politics. The resguardo is home to the Tarapoto wetland complex, an alluvial plain formed by the Amazon River and the lower confluence zone of the Loreto Yacu River. The Tarapoto Lake system, located 2 kilometers from the urban center of Puerto Nariño, experiences a variation up to 14 meters in water level due to flood periods. The Tarapoto Lake system is well known for its distinctive environment characterized by black waters, stemming from the substantial decomposition of organic matter. This phenomenon gives rise to a unique food source, fostering a diverse array of fish species. This ecosystem stands out globally as an incredible hub for the reproduction and development of riverine aquatic fauna, serving as essential nurseries for the fish and the habitats for iconic species such as the pink dolphin and river grey dolphin, also the pirarucu, which is the world's largest river fish, also black caimans and manatees. Yet, the ecological significance of Tarapoto wetlands extend beyond its unique environmental characteristics. This outstanding environment holds profound cultural importance for indigenous communities that dwelled in the area, such as the Ticuna, Cocama, and Yagua people, which intricately woven their mythology into this lake and riverine system. The majority of Resguardo Ticoya's population belong to the Ticona ethnic group, self-dominated as the Maguta people. The remaining inhabitants include those from the Cocama and Yagua ethnic groups, who have inhabited the region at least since 17th century, constituting the legislative indigenous body of the Resguardo. Additionally, some newcomer families from other Amazonian departments, such as Caquetá and Putumayo, belong to ethnic groups like Boras, Huitotos, and Mirañas, which also inhabit the Resguardo. In the urban area of Puerto Nariño, there is a presence of mestizos and settlers from the country's interior. The 19th century rubber industry expansion in the Amazon region marked a dark period, characterized by the enslavement of indigenous population and noteworthy migrations. The emergence of Ticoya communities is linked to this era, particularly as communities created by families that escape from rubber-producing ranches or rancherias chiringueiras. Those communities served as a refuge for those escaping the pressures imposed by robber barons. During the 19th century, independence movements in Colombia and Peru, the delineation of the Amazon trapeze borders became a point of contention between these newly formed nations. However, it wasn't until the early 20th century that the legal resolution of boundary divisions in the Amazon among Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia took place. By the Solomon-Lozano Treaty, ratified in 1922, Peru ceded to Colombia the left bank of the Putumayo River and an adjacent strip along the Amazon River, recognized as the Trapeze of Leticia. The Amazon Trapeze became part of Colombia, providing the country with the lone access to the Amazon River. However, the Colombian government launched a settler expansion in the area until 1940s, after the war between Colombia and Peru in 1930s, contributing to the inception of the idea of a nation among the native populations, facilitated by the efforts of Colombian religious figures in the region. Despite the regional fragmentation resulting from national divisions, the institutional presence of the Colombian state remained minimal, with control largely in the hands of robber barons. However, these indigenous communities established their legislative body where the curaca served as leader, and in conjunction with shamans, they administered local justice. While acknowledging that the figure of curaca, or paternal leader, is not native to Amazonian cultures, it was adopted, gaining significance notably during the 1940s. The curaca, the male leader of the group, played a pivotal role in subsequent period social and territorial organization in the area. As I will describe later, the traditional role of the curaca will be contested in the past 10 years, mainly by female leaders, which are becoming curacas as well. Before the 1950s, the area boasted an abundance of fish, making manual capture relatively easy, especially along the lake and riverine banks. However, from the 1950s to the 1970s, the fur trade, fishing, and timber industry led to a decline in species, jeopardizing the ecosystem balance and prompting continuous modification to local livelihoods. In the late 1980s, the low number of fish in the area led to local formulation of resource management plans by indigenous people in the Ticoya Resguardo. The NGOs provided financial and technical support, and by the 1990s, conservation and resource management had already become central to the Resguardo's political discourse. However, the implementation of the fishing policies, or acuerdos de pesca, and other conservation plans led to several disagreements within the communities, particularly within the introduction of the Wetlands Management Plan. The plan, forged by technical language of the NGOs, shifted from the indigenous plan, which was focused on the well-being of the indigenous population, to a discourse focused on wetland and species conservation, leading to tensions within the resguardo. Besides the conflicts that these implementations in resource management brought, the local context is way more complex, as historically this area has been influenced economically and politically by drug lords. The Ticoya Resguardo experienced a surge in drug trafficking between 1980s and 1990s, bringing a sudden economic wealth and a wider societal stratification. Local authorities have faced charges and subsequent imprisonment based on accusation of engaging in corruption and colluding with drug traffickers. The combination of drug trafficking and ecotourism have seen the surge of a small indigenous bourgeoisie, which are the owners of motorboats and small eco-lodges. The recent class disparity between the communities is interpreted locally as a consequence of corruption, where some indigenous leaders have been accused of illicit enrichment. In this complex and already heated context, we saw another problematic: the implementation of the Ramsar site, which has sparked even more problems within the resguardo. Before continuing, I will pause to describe briefly the methodology that I use for this research. My research project initially aimed to conduct a study-up analysis, focusing on the perspective of bureaucrats, NGO staff, and indigenous leaders. However, since this research involved working in indigenous territory, I present my project to the indigenous authorities to the Ticoya Resguardo, adhering to the principles of prior consultation and informed consent. This presentation was held on Monday, November 8, 2021, at the headquarters of the local indigenous organization at Ticoya. During the presentation, the indigenous authorities support the continuation of my research, but with a slightly change in the methodology. They told me to conduct more interviews than initially planned, specifically interviewing indigenous leaders that are not affiliated with the local indigenous organization, as many indigenous leaders left the organization after the Ramsar implementation. Also, they told me to interview former curacas throughout the territory, indigenous employed in local NGOs, knowledgeable elders from the communities, and the guardians of the lakes, which is a group of fishermen who check who enters to the lakes while verifying also the amount of fish they carry at their departure. At some extent, my final research was tailored to meet the demands of the community leaders in the resguardo, aligning closely with their priorities. Guided by community members, direct observation afforded me a first-hand perspective on the reality within which these communities exist. The diverse range of indigenous voices in the resguardo facilitated this immersive experience, shedding light on the perceived negative impacts brought about the implementation of the Ramsar site. The initial methodology aimed at achieving a balanced representation through interviews encompassing indigenous leaders, NGO staff, and public servants. However, despite assurances from international NGOs, particularly WWF and the Ramsar Secretariat, promises for interviews were unfulfilled. Despite my persistent efforts over approximately 18 months, no interviews were done with these NGOs. Also, I requested public documents related to the Ramsar site's implementation, but these documents were not provided. Both organizations directed me to their websites for available documents, which, upon examination, lacked details on the negotiation, prior consultation, and informed consent processes. The Omacha Foundation also proved reticent in providing documentation beyond what is available online. Despite promises of an interview from the scientific director and research leader in the Tarapoto wetlands, these commitments were unfulfilled despite multiple attempts to arrange them. An indigenous leader affiliated with Omacha generously granted me 2 interviews. This leader, while primarily engaged with the NGO, clarified me that their insights were offered from the perspective of a community leader rather than as a member of Omacha. While the absence of information from NGOs created a data gap, the depth gained from interviews and conversations with indigenous members enriched the insights. The conspicuous secrecy maintained by the NGOs tells a lot about the Ramsar implementation in this area. The indigenous interpretation of these islands highlights a potentially opaque process in implementing at the Ramsar site that put indigenous leaders on the background. My ethnographic fieldwork spanned a duration of 11 months, comprising 3 different visits to Colombia. The first trip occurred during the summer of 2019, followed by a subsequent trips between August and November 2021, and from January to early June 2022. Throughout this period, I conducted 42 in-depth interviews and engaged in 20 structured conversations. In addition to these formal interactions, I actively fostered connections with various community members, including tourist guides, fishermen, artisans, and local bureaucrats. I conducted interviews across diverse locations, including Bogotá, Leticia, Puerto Nariño, and 7 indigenous communities within the resguardo. Online and telephone interviews were extended to participants in Spain and Brazil. Okay, I will stop here for the methodology and let's move on. The Amazon River is going to Correo Lake and Tarapoto Lake in less than 15 years, and the authorities knew it for a long time. This is the ridiculous spectacle of trying to conserve the unconservable. This is like a chronicle of a death foretold. This quote comes from a professor at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, an expert in limnology who participated in several technical studies in the area, including those Acuerdos de Pesca and Ramsar. He told me that the Amazon River is eating the shores of Puerto Nariño, eroding the body of land that divides the Amazon River from the Correo and Tarapoto lakes. When I visited the area, I had the opportunity to see this firsthand. He told me, the river moves creating meanders. In fact, Lake Tarapoto is an abandoned meander, or oxbow lake. The meanders course from one side to the other, like a snake. And the meander that is in front of Puerto Nariño is moving upwards, eroding all that coastal part. The Amazon is going to eat up the Correo and Tarapoto in less than 15 years, and the authorities knew it for a long time. The meandric movement, a familiar phenomenon to indigenous inhabitants of the Amazon, possesses substantial challenges to conservation plans aiming to preserve oxbow lakes such as the Tarapoto Lake. The Amazon River is globally recognized as the most voluminous river. Its formidable water flow undergoes continuous modification in meandric movement through cycle fluctuations, resulting in the creation of new meanders. This perpetual reshaping involves significant sediment load and discharge, perpetually transforming both biotic and abiotic environments. Amidst this dynamic context, communities of the resguardo situated along the Amazon River shoreline and the urban area of Puerto Nariño face persistent challenges, witnessing the gradual loss of coastal territory due to the river's movement. Year after year, inhabitants must strategize for reconstruction, including the design of alternative routes and bridges. The high water season exacerbates these challenges. Following the 2020 high water season, the municipality found itself fully exposed to the Amazon River's channel, as the protective barrier of Puerto Nariño, the Sancuro Island, was swept away by the formidable force of the Amazon River flow. The entrance to the Tarapoto Lakes lies in close proximity to Puerto Nariño, and the relentless movement of the Amazon River is encroaching upon this entrance, pushing a new meander close to the Tarapoto and Correo lakes. Ultimately, these lakes will succumb to the Amazon relentless force. An indigenous fisherman sharply told me, all this fuss to preserve what belongs to the Amazon is in vain. We can attempt everything, but the river is reclaiming what is theirs. Emphasizing the impossibility of preserving the iconic Tarapoto lakes, an integral part of the Tarapoto wetlands. The familiarity of local fishermen with the meandric movement and the ongoing erosion of coast in Puerto Nariño and the eastern communities of the resguardo raises skepticism regarding the success of conservation efforts in that delicate ecosystem. This skepticism has positioned many fishermen in opposition to the stringent fishing regulations in Los Lagos de Tarapoto, adding an extra layer of complexity to the conflicts that face the resguardo. Regarding the Ramsar implementation, an interviewee, an indigenous leader of Aticoya, told me succinctly, "We didn't know that the Ramsar Convention even existed. In fact, many countrymen still do not know what it is. It was Fernando from the NGO Omacha who made all the arrangements so that our lakes become part of that convention. It was Fernando who moved his influence with the people from the WWF and they reached the Ministry of the Environment. The guys from Omacha and from the WWF were the ones who sold the project to the government. They didn't tell us anything until all the arrangements were done. No one from the Indigenous Association participated as an active member in the negotiations of conditions. WWF avoids getting involved with any of our indigenous organizations here in the Amazon. When they socialized the Ramsar project with us, everything was already fixed. They only invited us as listeners, but not as an active members. They even told us, it will be good for you. Schools are going to be built. Scholarship for students are going to be delivered. More economic opportunities are going to happen. None of that has happened. That's why many paisanos feel that Omachat only tricked us. And the one who benefited the most from all of this was Fernando. He goes around the world giving lectures about the pink dolphins, the manatees, and the lakes of Tarapoto as a Ramsar site, but we have not seen the benefits that they had promised us, or they have fallen very, very short of fulfilling their promises. We only have the Lancha de los Vigías, a surveillance post for access to the lakes, and even that doesn't work very well. Yes, we have Ramsar, but we are still screwed. This short fragment reflects on the overall dissatisfaction and frustration within the Ramsar implementation process in the resguardo. I picked this testimony as it condenses a shared sentiment among numerous members of Aticoya and the communities with whom I spoke. The vast majority of indigenous people that I interviewed blamed the scientific director of Omacha Foundation for unrespecting the traditional indigenous authority, making negotiations at the backs of the Indigenous Association. Local indigenous leaders were relegated to passive recipients rather than empowered active agents. In the same interview, the interviewee told me that the prior consultation to the Indigenous Authority was made already when Omacha and the WWF had already presented the project to the Colombian government, but without a prior consultation in the communities. In navigating the intricate contemporary context of the Ticoya resguardo, I was able to witness several side problems during the implementation, such as corruption allegations. These allegations extend across a broader context, resulting in the imprisonment of some indigenous authorities on charges of wrongdoing. The corruption schemes are way more complicated. It's important to note that the presence of narco-traffickers since the 1980s in the region has impacted various aspects of local life, including access to land, employment, and political engagement. Some indigenous leaders have criticized the role of NGOs in the region as a kind of band-aid, as they pursue their activities of conservation without addressing narco-traffic and related activities, such as drug addiction and prostitution, but over-focusing on conserving mammal species, in particular the pink dolphin. To analyze the critique voiced by some indigenous leaders, I employ Antonio Gramsci's theoretical insights on civil society as a complex process wherein non-governmental organizations can inadvertently bolster hegemonic rule. While some private organizations within civil society can challenge oppressive dynamics or hegemonic discourses, Gramsci's insight also point towards how the good intentions of such non-governmental organizations can, in fact, strengthen the status quo of state policies and hegemonic power. In this instance, An excessive emphasis on virtuous conservation has jeopardized the land sovereignty of indigenous people while leaving economic and societal disparities, molded by criminal activities over the last 4 decades, largely untouched. During my fieldwork and after analyzing the data, the idea that was more present was corruption. However, corruption as secrecy served also as a cohesive element within the communities, as members of the communities historically have cohabited with criminal groups. Using Zizek, I interpret corruption as a sort of superego, that is, a hidden law that transcends the limit of public law. In a Colombian state grappling with the inability to secure employment and essential social services, corrupt and criminal activities have filled the void, not without their share of nefarious consequences. Corruption and illicit actions function as a supportive and clandestine law beyond the public rational order, this superego or the fetishistic denial thereof. In the context of narco-trafficking, corruption as a manifestation of the superego becomes a tool that reinforces group cohesion, offering a sense of order beyond explicit community rules. Within this framework, corruption and illegal activities play a role in creating apparently mutually beneficial relationships, fostering a presumed sense of unity. Yet, exists a dichotomy within these dynamics. While this superego has boosted a sense of secret cohesion within the group, it has simultaneously sown the seeds of dissent and fracture within the local indigenous association. Corruption has also opened fractures when there is a lack of control over the narrative and the management of secrets. The secrecy of extralegal activities has a precarious nature of cohesion when information and narratives are not adequately managed. For instance, the day the Indigenous organization accepted my research, I asked the Indigenous authorities for the Ramsar Agreement documentation. The Aticoya vice president told me, "We don't have any. All the information from the association computers was destroyed. Not a single document survived to the mysterious purge." That same day, I learned that two influential former curacas, the one who preceded as president when the Ramsar implementation occurred and his successor, faced punishment from the Indigenous Justice Committee. Subsequently, they were apprehended and imprisoned by local Colombian authorities amid this chaotic affair. Empirical illustrations, such as the Indigenous Association mysterious purge of the information related to the Ramsar implementation, and the silence of Omacha and the WWF when not providing interviews and public documents, exemplify in tandem how organizations strategically control information flow. This deliberate secrecy plays a crucial role in organizational private dynamics, although when engaged in public matters, transparency is expected, making their secrecy a questionable landmark on public ethics. Fractures within the Indigenous organization, however, allow to rise positive outcomes, such as empowerment of Indigenous women leaders, the emergence of young leaders disrupting all forms of Indigenous leadership dominated by elderly men, and more active participation of the LGBTQ community within the resguardo. The fractures have allowed new possibilities in the local political landscape. After interviewing several women Indigenous leaders, it became evident their collective efforts to challenge the old leadership dynamics dominated by men and wrapped up in corrupt allegations. A woman leader told me once, "They told us we are only good to clean the house. Well, we're going to clean this big house as well. We're going to clean it from corrupt leaders and bring order." In response to the identified instances of corruption, women Indigenous leaders have emerged as a powerful force in local politics, actively addressing the adverse impacts of corruption. The current prominence of women leaders in the resguardo signifies a notable departure from traditional leadership structures, presenting a novel perspective on communitarian leadership. their leading work injects a fresh vigor into the local indigenous organization, fostering innovative alliances with young leaders and those from the LGBTQ community within the resguardo. This transformative shift not only opposes the corrosive effects of corruption, but also reshapes the traditional cultural fabric, contributing to a dynamic and inclusive vision for the future of the Ticoya resguardo. Okay, as a wrap up, claims persist against the WWF and Omacha Foundation, and claiming that they have not fully delivered the promised benefits to the communities. The lack of transparency exhibited by the NGOs, coupled with the limited community involvement in decision-making processes, prompts questions about the equitable distribution and management of funds. Amid this secrecy and opacity surrounding the Ramsar site implementation and the administration of international funds sustaining it, corruption allegations have surfaced within the resguardo. These accusations extend to NGO staff, indigenous leaders, and public servants associated with the entire implementation process. While corruption and illegal activities may seem to cultivate mutually beneficial relationships between some leaders and political figures, they have also instigated fractures within the local indigenous organization. Within this intricate context, the indigenous organization and leadership movement in the communities have catalyzed a transformation in cultural perceptions of leadership. Notably, the growing prominence of women leaders challenges traditional forms of leadership where older men have traditionally held representative roles. This shift in traditional forms have encountered resistance and has been particularly difficult. However, the tense and challenging context, coupled with various instances of corruption, secrecy, and disruption of local ways of life due to the perceived inadequate execution of conservation policies, have led to the emergence of a political voice from women and the LGBTQ population in the communities. These voices challenge the traditional curacas. As a final note, it's important to note that women indigenous leaders are not against conservation itself, but rather object to the specific manner in which it has been implemented. They advocate for alternative approaches to conservation and community leadership. Okay, I'm going to stop here and I can go into more nuances of my fieldwork if you have any questions about it. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Elías. This was a truly interesting presentation.